Hey everybody, welcome to another deep dive with Safety One Source. And as safety pros, I'm sure you guys are dealing with tons of regulations and paperwork and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
So today we are going to be diving into something that I think you'll find pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And it's OSHA's record-keeping standard, 1904.34. Specifically, how this applies when businesses change hands. So think like mergers, acquisitions, that kind of thing. Because it can get kind of murky. You know, what happens to all those safety records?
Yeah, for sure. It's a question that comes up a lot.
Exactly.
Does the slate get wiped clean?
Yeah.
Or are there things that the new owner has to deal with?
Yeah. What are their obligations? So that's what we're going to be digging into today.
Okay.
So to kind of set the stage, let's say we've got a company that's being sold or acquired. What happens to all those OSHA records from the previous owner?
Well, the previous owner is responsible for keeping those records, obviously, for their period of ownership. But the regulation is very clear that those records have to be handed over to the new owner.
Okay, so they don't just disappear.
No,
they get transferred.
Correct.
But what about the new owner? Let's say the old records are a mess, like there are inaccuracies or things missing. Does the new owner have to go back and fix all that?
You know, that's a great question. And I think it might surprise a lot of people to know that the answer is no.
Right.
The new owner is not required to correct those old records. And the reasoning behind that is actually pretty interesting.
Okay.
It's about maintaining that historical record.
Okay.
So even if the new owner has fantastic safety practices and is doing everything right, OSHA still wants to see the full picture.
So even if things are good now,
yeah,
those past records can show areas where there might have been issues.
Exactly. They're data points, trends, potentially recurring hazards. So even though they're not responsible for fixing them, they still have to keep them.
So it's less about having a perfectly clean record and more about having a complete timeline, even if it's a little messy.
Yeah, you could put it that way. It's about seeing how safety has evolved at that particular workplace.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does this actually play out in the real world? Like, what does it mean for someone like me, a safety manager working in a company that's going through these transitions?
Well, there are implications on both sides.
Yeah.
Let's say you're on the team that's acquiring a company.
Yeah.
Those old records are like a window into their safety culture.
Ooh, that's a good way to put it.
You know, you can see their past performance, potential problem areas, things to watch out for. It's part of your due diligence.
Yeah, so don't just assume everything's rosy because things look good now.
Right. You got to dig deeper.
And on the flip side, if you're selling a company, obviously you want your records to be as accurate and complete as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. That protects you legally, and it makes the transition smoother for everyone involved.
So there's a real strategic advantage to having those records in order.
Yeah.
Beyond just complying with the regulations.
I mean, think about it. Even if OSHA didn't require this, wouldn't a smart new owner want this information? It's like getting a free safety audit from the past.
Yeah, that's a great point.
You can see what worked, what didn't, and build on that knowledge.
That's really interesting. And hey, you know what? Speaking of resources, didn't Safety One Source actually put together a video about this?
Oh, yeah, they did.
I thought I saw that somewhere.
Yeah, and it's a really popular video, too, which shows you how important this whole topic is. A lot of people have questions about it.
Yeah, it's not something you think about every day.
Right.
But when it comes up, you definitely want to know what you're dealing with.
For sure.
So that's a great resource for folks. We'll definitely link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely check it out.
All right, so we've talked about the basics, why these records matter. But let's get a little more specific now.
Okay.
Let's say I'm that new safety manager walking into a newly acquired company. I find boxes of old records. Some may be organized, some maybe not. What am I actually looking for in those records?
All right, so here's where things get a little more interesting.
Yeah, let's dive in.
We're going to shift gears a little bit. We've talked about the why. Now let's talk about the how.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
So you've got those boxes. You're the new safety manager. What are you actually looking for in those records?
Yeah, what are the key things?
Well, you're looking for trends, patterns, anything that gives you insight into the safety culture that existed before you arrived.
So it's like detective work.
Exactly.
Okay.
I like that.
Were there a lot of repeat injuries in a certain department? Did they have a spike in incidents after a particular change? Maybe their training records are non-existent for some high-risk tasks.
Oh, those would be red flags for sure.
Right. And those are the kind of things you want to spot early on.
So it's almost like you're getting a free safety audit from the past.
You got it. And a smart safety pro uses that information to their advantage.
I see where you're going with this.
Let's say you find a pattern of back injuries in their warehouse.
Now you know exactly where to focus your efforts. Maybe revamp their lifting procedures. Invest in ergonomic equipment. Provide targeted training. You're essentially building on the lessons they already learned, hopefully the hard way.
Makes total sense.
It's about being proactive and using this historical data to prevent future incidents.
Okay, but what if those records are just plain bad? Like missing information, stuff that doesn't add up, or even potentially falsified records. What are my options as the new owner?
Okay, so that's a really important question and one we hear a lot.
I bet.
And it can be a tricky situation,
Right.
but the good news is you're not obligated to correct or update those old records.
Really?
Even if they're incomplete or inaccurate, your main responsibility is to maintain them as they were received.
Okay, that's good to know.
Now, that doesn't mean you just ignore any problems you find.
Right.
You can definitely make note of any discrepancies for your own internal awareness.
So kind of like an internal audit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can also start fresh, accurate records from the day you take ownership. But you still have to keep those old records alongside your new ones.
So you're not erasing history, you're just adding a new chapter.
That's a great way to put it. And that new chapter can show how you're improving safety, addressing past problems, building a stronger safety culture.
And that's something OSHA would look favorably on, I imagine.
Absolutely. It demonstrates a commitment to continuous improvement.
Okay. So we've talked about what to look for in those records, how to handle bad data, but how do you actually use this information effectively? What are some practical tips for those safety pros who find themselves inheriting these records?
All right, so let's get down to brass tacks. Here are a few key things to keep in mind.
Okay, I'm ready.
First, don't get overwhelmed. You don't have to analyze every single piece of paper on day one.
Right, take it one step at a time.
Exactly. Start by organizing the records and getting a sense of what you have. Then focus on key areas like incident rates, types of injuries, training records, any OSHA inspections or violations. Look for patterns and trends.
Makes sense. So you're essentially conducting a retrospective safety analysis.
Precisely. You're learning from the past to improve the future.
Okay, I like that.
And don't be afraid to reach out to people who were there before the acquisition, the previous safety team employees who have been there a while.
Oh yeah, insider knowledge?
Exactly. They can provide valuable context that you might not get from the records alone.
Like piecing together a puzzle.
Exactly. You're using all the available pieces to get the full picture.
I like that analogy. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the legal requirements, the strategic advantages, and even some practical tips for using these records effectively. But is there anything else our listeners should keep in mind as they navigate this whole world of mergers and acquisitions and OSHA record keeping?
Yeah, I think the key takeaway here is this. OSHA's record-keeping standard isn't just a bureaucratic hurdle. It's a powerful tool that, when used correctly, can actually enhance workplace safety.
I like that perspective.
Whether you're buying a company, selling one, or just managing safety day-to-day, understanding these rules and their implications can give you a real edge.
Awesome. And speaking of making a difference, before we wrap up, I just want to remind everybody that this deep dive is brought to you by Safety One Source.
Of course.
They've got a ton of resources, including that video we mentioned earlier, to help you navigate the complexities of OSHA record keeping and so much more.
They're an incredible resource for safety pros.
All right, so we've talked about the legal side, the strategic side, but what's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away thinking about when it comes to OSHA 1904.34 and business transitions?
You know, it might sound simple, but it's crucial. Don't just file those old records away and forget about them.
Good point.
They're not just dusty relics of the past. They're a valuable tool for understanding the safety journey of a company and using those lessons to create a safer, healthier workplace for everyone.
Love that. So go in with curious eyes, learn from those records,
Yeah,
and make them work for you, not against you.
exactly. That's the key.
All right, that's fantastic advice. So safety pros, next time you're faced with a company merger or acquisition, remember what we talked about today. Use those OSHA records wisely. Learn from the past and keep building that brighter, safer future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And be sure to check out Safety One Source for all the tools and resources you need along the way. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, it really is. It just highlights how often these kinds of transitions happen in the business world.
Yeah, for sure.
And how important it is for us safety folks to be aware of these rules and how they impact our work.
Absolutely. It's easy to get tunnel vision on our own facility and our own day-to-day stuff.
Right.
But we got to keep the big picture in mind.
Always.
And this rule is definitely a part of that.
For sure. It's not just about checking boxes,
Yeah.
It's about using information proactively to create a safer work environment.
Absolutely. So let's get into the nitty-gritty here. Let's say I'm that new safety manager walking into a company that's just been acquired. I've got boxes of old OSHA records, some organized, some not. What am I actually looking for in those records?
Okay, so now we're talking, this is where the real detective work begins.
Yeah, let's break it down.
You're looking for anything that gives you a glimpse into the safety culture that was in place before you got there. Trends, patterns, red flags, anything that helps you understand the safety journey this company has been on.
So it's not just about looking for mistakes or violations.
No, not at all. It's about understanding the context.
Uh-huh.
For example, were there a lot of repeat injuries in a specific department? Did they have a spike in incidents after they implemented a new process or brought in a new piece of equipment?
Oh, interesting.
Maybe their training records are spotty or non-existent for certain high-risk tasks. Those are the kinds of things you want to identify early on.
So you can get ahead of potential problems.
Exactly. It's about being proactive, not reactive. Okay, I like that. But what if those records are just bad? Like really bad. Missing information stuff that doesn't make sense. Potentially even falsified records. What do I do then?
That's a tough situation to be in for sure.
Yeah. What are my options as the new owner?
Well, the good news is you're not required to go back and fix those old records.
Oh, really?
Even if they're inaccurate or incomplete, your responsibility is to maintain them as you receive them.
Okay, that makes me feel a little bit better.
But that doesn't mean you just sweep everything under the rug.
Right.
You can definitely document any discrepancies you find,
Right.
just for your own internal awareness.
Okay, so kind of like an internal audit to identify any gaps or issues.
Exactly. And you can start fresh with your own accurate records from the day you take ownership.
So you're not erasing history, you're just adding to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that new chapter shows OSHA and everyone else that you're committed to improving safety.
Yeah, it shows you're taking it seriously.
And it gives you a baseline to measure your progress against. Okay, that makes sense. So we've talked about what to look for, how to handle bad data. But how do you actually use all this information effectively? What are some practical tips for safety pros who are inheriting these records?
Well, first things first, don't get overwhelmed. You don't have to tackle everything at once.
Yeah, don't let the paperwork monster get you down.
Right. Start by organizing the records and getting a sense of what you have. Then focus on the key areas. Incident rates, types of injuries, training records, any OSHA inspections or violations.
Okay, those are the big ones for sure.
And then look for patterns and trends. Are certain departments or job roles associated with more incidents? Are there recurring hazards that haven't been addressed? It's all about connecting the dots.
So you're basically conducting a safety audit, but using historical data.
Exactly. You're learning from the past to create a safer future.
I love that. And don't be afraid to talk to people who were there before the acquisition.
Oh, that's so important. The previous safety team, maybe some longtime employees.
Yeah, they could provide valuable insights.
Institutional knowledge that you just can't get from the records alone.
It's all about getting the full picture.
Right. And remember, this isn't a one-time thing. Make reviewing these records a regular part of your safety management process.
So it's an ongoing process.
Exactly. It's about continuous improvement.
Awesome. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Any final thoughts before we wrap up this section?
I think the most important thing to remember is that OSHA's record-keeping standard is more than just a rule. It's an opportunity.
I like that.
It's an opportunity to learn from the past and build a safer workplace.
And that's what it's all about, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. At the end of the day, it's about protecting people.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, it's easy to get lost in all the technicalities and regulations, but at the end of the day, it really is all about protecting people and making sure everybody goes home safe.
Exactly.
So let's recap a little bit what we've learned today about OSHA 1904.34 and how it applies when businesses change hands.
Okay, sounds good.
So essentially, when a company gets bought or sold, those OSHA records are like a time capsule.
I like that.
They tell a story about the company's safety history. And that story can be incredibly valuable for the new owner.
Yeah, for sure. It's a roadmap in a lot of ways.
And it can help the safety professional no matter what side of the deal you're on, whether you're the buyer or the seller.
Right. It gives you context. It helps you prioritize your efforts. It can really make a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of making a difference, I just want to remind everybody that this deep dive has been brought to you by Safety One Source. They've got a wealth of resources to help you navigate these tricky situations and build a top-notch safety program.
For sure. Check them out.
So before we wrap up, I want to get your final thoughts. What's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this conversation about OSHA record keeping and business transitions?
Okay, so if you only remember one thing from this whole discussion, let it be this. Don't treat those old OSHA records like they're just some dusty files that need to be shoved in a cabinet somewhere.
Yeah, there's so much more than that.
Exactly. They're a gold mine of information. They can help you understand where a company has been in terms of safety and where they need to go.
So don't just ignore them.
Right. Use them. Learn from them. Make them work for you.
Awesome advice. So safety pros, next time you're dealing with a merger and acquisition or any kind of business change, remember what we talked about today. Dig into those OSHA records, learn from the past, and use that knowledge to build a safer future.
Absolutely.
And be sure to check out Safety One Source for all the resources and support you need along the way. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks, everybody.